Chapter 18. Sunday, 28th of February, 1999, 8:53 p.m. Riverport, Massachusetts. William Joyce, 20 years old, finished his celebratory cocoa, rinsed the ceramic Riverport Raptors mug, and returned it to the cupboard above the sink. The house was dark, silent. He had taken Jack, his younger brother, over to the house of the Serene family. He'd be staying for the night. Tonight, solitude was imperative. Tonight, Will would undertake a journey of great risk, one he had worked towards since he was a boy of 15. Utilizing grant money, academic connections, and falsified passport he had secured through, of all places, a local biker bar, William Joyce had financed the construction of a device that learned men and women many years his senior had laughed off as ridiculous, impossible. Screw those guys. William zipped his jumpsuit to the neck, ensured his canvas utility belt was securely fastened. Clipped to it was everything a chrononaut might possibly need. Pen light, cell phone, a roll of elastic tubing, alligator clips, pens, waterproof notebook, a digital multi-language translator he had bought from a magazine, a canvas pouch containing aspirin and iodine and anti-malaria medication. Around his neck were binoculars and a brownie camera. Beneath the jumpsuit was a second-hand bulletproof vest. The pack on the kitchen table contained a change of clothes, a bottle of water, 3 cans of spiced ham, 7 novels, an edition of that day's New York Times, and an untested Chronon storage device, painstakingly charged over a period of years that he was fairly sure had been adequately shielded. A note rested on the kitchen table beneath a thin vase. It read, "Dear Reader, if you have found this letter, I am gone. Grieve not for me, but make proper use of the gift I have left mankind. In the old barn, sitting stately outside the casement of this very kitchen, is a time machine. Yes, you read that correctly. A time machine. I bequeath now to the government of the United States, who are best equipped to plumb the secrets and discoveries I have made, cataloged extensively in the notes I have left behind, the right to license my work for the betterment of mankind. I leave the negotiations to Mrs. Serene of 94 Chestnut Avenue, who has been more experienced in these things than I. As my brother, Jack, I bequeath to him all the proceeds and royalties from all goods and services based upon my research, discoveries, inventions, and intellectual property. Additionally, this shall cover all costs of being cared for by the Serene family of 94 Chestnut Avenue, as they continue to foster and care for him until the age of 21. All I ask is that great care be taken with the Chronon Core, TM, for as long as it remains active and connected to my beautiful promenade, TM. I may yet, someday, return. Look for me in the year 2019. Ad Futura, Ad Astra. Dr. William Joyce. Qual pending." William read the note one more time, nodded with satisfaction, hoisted his travel pack, and marched for the barn, stopping only one last backward glance. How he wished his parents had lived to see this moment. He opened the front door, and hunching past the icy winter air, closed that chapter of his life, and with a thunk of a lock, 1.5 inches of snow had fallen the night before, and several inches that month. William was pleased that he had invested his few remaining dollars in the sturdy utility boots he had found at the thrift store on River Street. They kept the moisture out well, the snow crunching satisfyingly beneath the worn tread. Warm light fell into subtly fanning lines from between the boards of the barn across the garden. Amber illumination sparkling white, glowing moonlight blue. With shaking hands, he unclipped his key rings and snapped loose the 3 padlock chains from the flimsy barn door. Gravity snaked them eagerly through the iron loops, sending them clinking heavily to the freshly packed snow. Stepping into the barn laboratory, he pulled the door closed behind him. It was only a few degrees warmer inside, made so by the grumbling generator and ambient temperature of the beautiful promenade in its stout, multifaceted heart. William surveyed his kingdom, nodding as he found each essential piece as it should be. The generator, jouncing and thrumming. The chronon capacitor, running a little hot, but the charge at 100%. The departure station, created from a dozen PCs running in tandem. The date prominently on screen in satisfying retro font, November 1st, 2019. The systems monitoring station, online, all gauges reading nominal. That would change once his creation was brought to life, which left the core. The core was offline, utilizing a 10,000 terahertz laser, small quantities of multiple isotopes, a small reaction chamber within a nuclear research lab at a South American university, a homing carbon launcher, and a supercomputer William had fabricated with a magnetically sealed geometric sphere, one stable and relatively safe microscopic black hole. That's what was resting at the center of the machine, within that sphere, waiting to be brought online. No time like the present. He crossed to systems monitoring. A socket rested at the center of every facet of the core's geometric casing. Resting half inserted into each socket was a flat 8-inch connector. Running from each connector was a wide gauge length of cabling, connecting directly to one segment of the promenade. Triple checking all settings and conditions, William deemed all things to be optimal. 5 years, great risk, and all his grant money and professional earnings had gone toward this moment of truth. Make it so! He clicked a single key. Masses of black cabling jumping once as electromagnets charged and plugs slammed into sockets. Will's eyes flicked from the core, down to the diagnostic screens and back to the core. A bass thump kicked pleasantly through the ribs of a single distortion wave pulsed off the promenade. Electricity plugs sparked and burned out. Light bulbs exploded, dropping the barn into freezing half-light. The generator screamed and black smoke poured from the wrong places. Will's eyes scanned information feverishly as it poured down the line, filling pulsing on-screen gauges, numerals skidding as they extended. The promenade lit up from within, a solid bar of white light blasting thickly from the airlock through winter air grown pungent with diesel fumes and burning insulation. Diagnostics informed him that the promenade had flooded itself momentarily with chronon particles. That wasn't meant to happen. Not yet. He hadn't primed the promenade for departure. Airlock disengaging. Deadbolts thunked back within the promenade's housing. Chronon levels were now at normal levels within. Hydraulics engaged. Atmosphere vented. William forgot the diagnostics. He stepped away from the bench to stand before the airlock. The hatch levered aside, and someone appeared inside the promenade's airlock, lurching into sight from the left. A visitor? The translator. He fumbled on his utility belt. He may need the translator. Welcome, traveler? William said, stammering. Damn it, What the stranger had to say needed no translation. From the ramp of the airlock, the figure raised one arm and shot William in the head. Paul popped into existence the second Beth stepped out of the corridor into the airlock. She caught him leaning heavily on the door, pointing the gun he had stolen from her at whatever was outside the machine. She didn't stop to think but barreled right into the little fucker, snapping one elbow to the side of his head. Paul's skull rebounded off the heavy iron door frame. The bounce back pitched him slack-bodied down the exit ramp. It's the hits you don't see coming that get you. She swept up the sidearm and hit the ground and came up level with Paul's head. Paul's face was a mess of tears as he rose weakly up off his knees. "No!" He put his hands up. "Please!" Backed away, half naked, stumbling. "No, no, no!" "Oh, fucking hell!" She gritted her teeth, steadied her arm. "Shut up! Please! 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 No! No!" It was freezing, but Beth felt nothing but sick. "Stop saying that! Shut up!" Their frantic breaths misted in clouds before them. She advanced. He backed away, off the ramp, onto a dirt floor. She recognized this place. They were in the Joyce barn. The same barn in which she had had the altercation with Gibson 17 years from now. There was a body on the floor, dressed like a cut-price ghostbuster. It was Jack's brother, Will. Paul chose that moment to turn and run. "Stop!" She fired. The round caught him above the hip, splashed right through him. Impact, turning him around. He was looking at her as he stumbled backward to one knee, tears streaking his quivering face. Staring down at himself in disbelief, seeing what had been done to him, he screamed in a ruined voice, wet with despair. Even then he was still trying to get to his feet, still trying to get away. Paul looked back up at her, as Beth shut her eyes and fired again. It took him through the shoulder, wrenching him around and down again. He coughed, scrambled weakly, trying to buy a few inches closer to an escape from this nightmare. "Don't!" Beth said, trying to see clearly. She shuddered, trading a little piece of herself to aim at the back of Paul's head. Then, just like that, he was gone, the barn door smashing wide open in his wake and all the cold in the world rushing in. Shock. He was gone. Paul Serene was out there, in the world, loose. Fuck! She flew to the door, liking her chances of being able to find him quick in the snow. The tracks were there all right, stretching all the way into the woods. Paul had covered hundreds of feet in no time. In this weather, wearing nothing but jeans, she wanted to believe he wouldn't make it. She needed confirmation. She needed a body. And the one on the floor behind her groaned. Will was alive. Paul was out there, but Will was in here, wounded. She couldn't give chase, so she screamed at the trees. Her own rage echoed back twice. Seconds later, she was at Will's side, telling him to remain still. Will's response was to shout something incomprehensible and utterly fail to follow instructions. Calm down! Will froze. She could see the livid tear across the left side of his skull, the flower bruise and free-flowing blood. I didn't do this to you. That was... Chut! Will barked. Nothing. What? Don't. Just... He panted, eyes ranging back and forth across nothing in particular. Have I been shot? Yes. Will fainted. If she was honest with herself, she was tempted to leave him there. The adrenaline was draining and a freezing cold was working its way to her bones. He had a canteen clipped to an overloaded belt. She unscrewed it, poured ice water across her fingers, and flicked it at his face. Will snapped to, barking, Ah! Ah! You were grazed, that's all. But just need to get to a hospital. Stop! He snapped, totally confused. Talking! Then, don't tell you anything from the future. Got it. I saw the same movie. Can you stand? That took the wind out of his sails, and Beth felt a little bad about it. She imagined he might have been preparing that speech for years. He righted himself, got to his feet. I should have expected this. Why didn't I expect this? Getting shot? Will looked pale, like he might throw up. Please stop saying that. It's very... Please stop saying that. He took a couple of steadying breaths. Visitors. I should have expected it once I activated the core. It stands to reason that future users want to go back as far as they could. Beth looked around. Looks like it's just us, though. Yeah, Will said. My thoughts on that are undecided. Well, she said, hugging herself, I need to get out of this cold, and there are just some things you need to know. That's just how it is. Wait, he said. Just wait. What do I call you? And please, no real names. I don't want to know anything about you. Will remembers Will's video message from the swimming pool. The vast universe felt suddenly like a small, tightly arranged room with everything in its place. They had always been in their place. September, she said, feeling very far from home. Call me September. Sunday, 28th of February, 1999, 9:49 p.m. Riverport, Massachusetts, 46 minutes later. The kitchen table was an oasis of light. Beth's mug was empty. William had no interest in his tea. She was silent as he processed all that she had told him. He hadn't looked at her for 20 minutes, eyes scanning left and right, processing. Eventually, she broke the quiet by asking if he understood what had to be done. You will not find his body, Will said. The man you pursued here. I know. The index and middle fingers of Will's hands wiggled nervously, processing. All the events of the future world of which you are a citizen will come to pass. In a sense, they've already happened and cannot be avoided or undone. You must understand that, September. Dr. Joyce, you know all you need to know. A machine based on your design damages the MJ field. We need help to repair the field. Can you design something that we can use in my time to repair it? It'll take 10 years. 2009. Perfect. I'll jump ahead 10 years, meet you, and... Will was shaking his head. It took 5 years for the promenade to accumulate enough of the chronon charge for the journey, and your rival depleted most of that. Beth put her mug down carefully. You haven't perfected chronon aggregation? I've barely begun. Most of my funds went to the creation of the machine's core. She felt panic rise. She didn't like it. She barely recognized it. She took the fear and compartmentalized it. Moved on. Tell me how we're going to fix the fracture in the MJ field. It'll be a broad spectrum solution. A carpet bombing, but it's the best I can do with the resources available. It'll be my life's work, but it's also a long shot. When can you start? He still hadn't looked at her, his eyes still ranging over nothing in particular. I started 20 minutes ago. Wednesday, 24th of May 2000, 6:11 p.m. 15 months, 25 days after time core activation. Point of view tilts sharply up, then down, then centers. Camera appears to be positioned on a writing desk. Location appears to be an attic, mostly empty. William Joyce enters frame, sits, adjusts his glasses. I was averaging 10 entries per 3-hour videotape, resulting in a collection of over 60 cassettes. It became apparent to me after a passionate entreaty from my visitor that this posed a significant security risk. As you could tell from the empty bookshelves behind me, that the collection has now been sanitized. I'll be restricting myself to a single videotape for the purposes of ordering my thoughts henceforth. He gathered his thoughts. Joyce reaches off camera, retrieves a mug, drinks from it, winces. I ran the numbers again today. My initial 10-year projections hold firm, but the cost has not, as I expected. To take the extraordinary measure of... His voice fails momentarily. Without funds, the countermeasure I'm creating cannot be completed. It follows, then, that if I fail in this task, the universe itself will... He becomes angry at himself. Today, I extinguished my parents with the stroke of a pen, by taking what money they had set aside for my younger brother and funneling it toward my work. I took the final gift to Jack, the boy who is all that remains of my family, to correct my mistake. He hit himself in the chest hard. William Joyce killed everyone. William's formerly guiltless expression had flushed, teeth locked. I'm the terrible thing at the end of the world, the figure poets and mystics foretold. It's not great. It is not proud. It's not mighty. He howls and then claps his head over his mouth, as if afraid of being discovered. He listens, hears nothing, resumes in a lowered voice, trembling. Buffoon. Simpleton. Idiot. I got strike to it, Armageddon. I stepped in it, like shit in the street. How does a person survive this kind of self-knowledge? I killed the universe. I killed everything. It is destroying me, and I can tell no one. No one. He drains the mug. I will require materials similar to those I used in the initial construction of the time core. And then some. I'm tempted to neutralize the core I have, but the sick truth of it is I need a working model for the reference and observations. At present, I believe I can refine my work on the chronon aggregator, allowing for the devising of a kind of, stupid term, but chronon bomb? Bomb in a sense of a intense, localized hypersaturation of chronon energy, calibrated to trigger particle propagation at a rate faster than I would expect of an MJ fraction to foster dissipation. However, more research needs to be done in a range of areas. I can't just make the fucking thing go boom. Propagation is one thing, but the damage to the field is another. The device doesn't intend to the problem at the very heart of the disaster, then causality but left to bleed once more, at best. He reaches for his mug, finds it empty, sets it down. Looks off camera. She remains in the woods, in a shelter she built for herself. Residing in the town is impossible, as she has no paperwork and can't very well take a job. She's let her appearance go, looking a little like the woman she stepped off the promenade last year. And she avoids Jack like he's contagious, and his little friend Paul. If I'm honest, I fear we're both losing our minds. Wednesday, 16th of August 2000, 7 p.m. Riverport, Massachusetts, 17 months, 17 days after time core activation. She had to wait until spring before starting work on the shelter. Before then, she had slept in the barn. Staying in the house was not an option. Things were complicated enough as it is without letting young Jack see her before he was due to actually meet her as Zed in 10 years' time. The first time she caught a glimpse of him in the barn, 2 feet shorter and 17 years younger. It was like vertigo. And, anyway, Will wanted to limit contact with her for fear of learning more about the future than he needed. That was fine by her, so she got some bedding and set up in the control room in the barn. The ground was freezing, but it was a small room, easy to warm with a space heater. So, she had killed time, watched actual music videos on MTV, and managed to avoid the final reactions to Clinton being acquitted, all while being quietly grateful that she wouldn't have to witness and live through everything that was coming after New York the following year. She had always known she would be here, and had always imagined the experience to be cute, fun. Instead, interacting with so many things that she knew to be dead, the news, the culture, a CRT TV, dial phones, newspapers, the music, the lingo, left her feeling ghostly. Her time here had ended long ago. She didn't belong. Both she and Will agreed that once the potential future was witnessed, that future would then become inevitable. With that in mind, she supposed that they could have spoken candidly about everything that would occur between now and 2016, but they didn't. It made Will exceedingly nervous, and it made her homesick as hell. Friday, 18th of August 2000, 7:10 p.m. The Joyce Farm. Irene Rose had been with the company for almost 10 years. Working under Randall Gibson had been some of the most fun she'd ever known. He was the one who gave her the handle IR, as in Irene Rose, as in infrared, as in she was very good at murder in the dark. Gibson, IR, Donnie, and the other muscle were the closest thing any of them had to family. That fit Monarch's selection criteria for their particular role. A couple of years ago, Gibson had told Irene Monarch had been trawling her background for 18 months before she'd even heard the name, Martin Hatch. This was when Monarch had been half the sizes in the present day. She'd be running combat operations through Iraq and Afghanistan for years when the call came in. No family, flexible morality, battlefield experience, top third percentile success rate, psych profile configured for uncommon resilience. That was the starting criteria. What it boiled down to, really, and everyone in the family knew it, was that Hatch wanted highly skilled, mentally reinforced, intelligent, and self-aware sociopaths who were perfectly loyal to a paycheck if not a person. Loyal without fault. Monarch had pulled her back stateside, then kept her waiting 6 months. She took a job in Vegas, analyzing post-strike drone footage of funerals in Afghanistan. A big burial turned out to mean the target had a lot of support, so IR spent hours and days going over high-res RPA footage and matched attendees against available intelligence. Before she clocked out each day, she filed recommendations for future targets. She hated the job. She was a doer, not a giver. IR had trouble breathing the same air as civilians, with their dumb concerns and cartoonish ideas of masculinity. She had no idea what Gibson going out of being married to one. She had been 1 week away from heading back to the Middle East when Martin Hatch called her in personally and flown her first class to Massachusetts. The non-disclosure agreements surrounding her employment with Monarch had been dense, with ink and paper termination clause being standard and the verbal one being quite literal. She was cool with that. They all were. A bunch of people just like her had been recruited, run through the program, standard boot camp, double the pay. Pretty much nobody flaked out. The academic stuff weeded about 30%. The stress test zipped up another 50%. The remaining 20%, herself included, had been black-bagged and shipped off to someplace anonymous. The usual shell game of trucks and planes and trucks and planes until they took the hood off and she was in a cell she'd occupy for the next 6 months. In between getting groomed for Monarch's fledgling lifeboat program, that had been her first experience with laboratory-induced stutters in her rescue rig. They started small and brief. 1 cubicle, sterile, stuttered for a minute. Before long, it was larger rooms, more complex environments, airborne detritus. Then came rescue scenarios, liberating frozen subjects and the like. Then came live fire, understanding how far a projectile travels and using the suit's capabilities to best advantage against a hostile chronon-active target. Then came one day mankind's first encounter with a shifter, and it all went to shit. They were going to be in a sealed and stuttered environment for 15 relative minutes. The environment would be in flux, posing a threat to life and limb. The shifter had phased in. The eager students calmly identified what they assumed was a new challenge. Some engaged. Others intended to evade en route to the exit zone. The blackly flickering thing had just stood there, immobile, taking a ton of punishment. IR remembered rounds pinging off it, swirling away through space and freezing before finally it activated. No, not activated. Reacted. It came to life with such shocking ferocity. She realized it hadn't been patient, or biding its time. It was pain. The thing had been immobilized by the sudden, shocking agony of its arrival. It identified the operatives in the room as the sources of that pain, and it turned on them like a living thing no longer capable of reasonable thought. It blitzed them. A combined Harvestar had better grasp of foreplay. It put them down like a Burning Man tries to put himself out. Frantically, furiously, blindly, desperately. In seconds, a dozen operative, men and women IR had come to know and name, were standing around, positioned like performance art. Weapons half lost from grips, spent shells glittering in the air like rain. All of them dead before any blood could escape them. It had been really interesting. IR hadn't moved from her starting position. Typically, she waited to see how the pattern of the room was going to play out before committing herself. It had paid off. Everyone else had died. She stayed put. The thing seemed to appreciate that. It stood there for minutes and minutes. So did IR, as still as she could. Finally, the thing was just gone. Then the stutter broke and all of her little friends hit the floor and started gushing blood. 90% of the graduating class washed out in less than a second, leaving just her and everyone else in Gibson's squad. The longest serving and the best A grade. Hatch's favorites. Paul Serene didn't like shifters. That was a well-known secret. He really didn't like them. Tough man, but there were gaps in his armor for sure. Didn't feel to her like he was meant for the life, but he was a big deal, a secret that had to be kept. And she liked that she and Gibson's crew were in on that. Their little secret. She got to see the world, got presented with fun and complex tasks, and she usually got to kill someone at the end of it. She, Gibson, their family were a big part of Monarch's success. The strategic elimination of obstacles on the way to 2016. Paul Serene had some kind of foresight, told them who would be a problem and when, knew how things would Tetris out if a block here and there were removed. She and her crew removed those blocks. It was a great way to make a living. And now, here she is, time traveling. IR let the airlock smooth and hiss, watched it open. She popped her head out and back, then committed to a slow pan of the barn down the barrel of her assault carbine. Clear, but the two rooms at the back were question marks. She advanced down the ramp. Carbine pressed to her shoulder, cleared both rooms. One crappy control room and the other storage for tech stuff. She let the carbine hang and turned up her left wrist. The Velcro's gauntlet had a clear window on the underside, and that window was printed portrait of a 10-year-old kid, Jack Joyce, target of the evening. Her orders were to kill the kid and no one else, especially not William Joyce, and especially not any other child in the house. IR could do that. She was down with games. She'd been given the rundown on how to operate one of these machines. Entering the control booth at the back of the barn, she checked the date on the clock. Wednesday, August 16, 2000. 7:12 p.m. Neat. Weird. She unclipped one vest pouch, unwrapped a small piece of gum, and then with one hand of her teeth, popped it in her mouth, and then re-shouldered the carbine, chewing. House. Nice night outside. Nice and warm. About to get ugly. Strawberry bubblegum. Gravel drive. She progressed heel-toe, foot over foot, nice and quiet, scanning windows and doors, got to the steps, tested each one with her boot, stepped over the creaky ones, front door unlocked. Big property like this, nice old town, traditional values. She couldn't respect that. Nudged on. Crept on in. Big room, 9 to 3, she clocked dining room. Stairs, sofa, fireplace, kitchen entrance. Clear. Dossier cited second floor as being where she'd find the kid's bedroom. Stairs. Carefully as she goes. Floorboard creaked. Spins to kitchen entrance. Someone there. Finger almost hits the sweet spot, and then she remembers just the kid. Identify yourself. Female, knife in hand. Big one. What's up, IR? Recognition. Wilder. Guessing it was cool to smoke this one, but what about leaving blood all over the house? Probably not cool. Training said leave no tracks. Outside. Easier to conceal. I already fucked up one of your squad in the living room, Beth Wilder said. That tastefully eggshell love seat is what saved Gibson's life. Won't say it again. How many more are coming? Randall? Voss? All of them? Safety clicked off. Beth sighed, understanding. All of them? Fuck's sake. Irene, didn't they teach you anything about the immutability of collapse waveforms? Wilder took a step for the door, complying, a nervous lick of her lips. A half glance to the stairs behind. Ira's instinct said, target. She glanced. There was no one on the stairs. The new information, all of a sudden, was that she couldn't breathe, or feel her arms, or legs. She watched the room tilt upward and rushed to smash her in the face. The flat blade of the carving knife caught moonlight just below her chin. Wilder's bare feet padded over to her, careful to stay out of the dark lake spreading across the boards. One disappointed sigh. God damn it, Irene. I wanted more time. IR spat out her gum onto the wet floorboards. And that was that. Thursday, 17th of August 2000, 3:23 p.m., Riverport, Massachusetts, North Side. Star Donovan walked home from school, same as every day. She didn't much want to be there, but getting solid grades was one of the things that made her mother happy. That was pretty important these days. She had her earphones on, the Discman looping that one Chumbawamba song. It was one of those songs that made her happy. That was pretty important as well. It got her to and from school, made sure there was a smile on her face when she walked in. She learned early that this was important as well. People reacted differently depending on what she did with her face, and how she felt seemed to affect that. Star's family had lived in Riverport for 2 years by this time. Her folks had said Dad was moving where the work was, but almost as soon as they moved to Riverport, the work dried up. The docks closed, and now Dad was away as much as he had been when they lived in Phoenix. It was cool, though. If he'd been home all the time, it would have felt weird. Their home was a little two-bedroom place from the 50s in the corner block. High wooden fence, big back garden. She had her bus pass and house key on a loop around her neck. Fishing it out, she let herself in, dropped her bag by the door, closed it behind her. She fished the Discman out of her jacket pocket and clicked it off. Looped the cords around the steel gray plastic body, put it on the kitchen counter. Made herself a sandwich. Raspberry, jelly, and cheese. Held it in one hand, walked to the TV. Stopped. Noticed the door to the back porch was open. Someone's shadow stretched on the wooden decking. Someone on the porch. Star padded over and peered up at the person leaning on the wooden railing. Dressed in dirty jeans, a pocketed old canvas jacket. Made her think the lady did the same work her dad did. Construction. Concreting. The railing's flanking paint pressed beneath her palms, the sun on her face. The lady smiled at Star, but Star could tell she had been crying. Star guessed the lady was doing that to her face, smiling to make her feel better, just like Star did to the other people. The lady had red hair, like Star, and looked like family. "Hello?" Star said, because she couldn't think of anything else to say. The stranger turned around properly and got down on her haunches, eye to eye with Star, and her smile felt more real now. She wiped the tears from her eyes with a swipe of her thumb, laughed at how silly she was being. Star reached out and touched her arm, and tears fell from the lady's eyes anyway. "Hey, me," the lady said. "It's you." Friday, 18th of August 2000, 6:07 a.m., the following morning. Will woke up every morning at 5:55 a.m. The paper was deposited in the mailbox by the road at 6 a.m. Will walked to collect it with his coffee at 6:05 a.m. while oatmeal warmed at the stove. That morning's edition of the newspaper ran with the story of a local girl, Star Donovan, missing from her home, believed abducted. Her mother was frantic, and her father was believing to be flying back from the Gulf where she'd been working on an oil rig. The girl had been missing less than 24 hours. Will snorted, sipped his coffee. That passed for news in a flyover town. There's something extra with that morning's edition. A handwritten note. Will, I unplugged the core. Don't know if I did it right. Don't care. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Strip the promenade, the whole thing. We're moving it. No more arguments. The bleach stain at the bottom of the stairs was me. Don't blame Jack. September. P.S. I've wired the house to explode. Instructions on your desk. The missing girl looked back at Will from the front page, red-headed and blue-eyed. It felt awfully cold for that time of year. Thursday, 18th of June 2009, 10 a.m., 9 years later. Randall Gibson had wondered what it'd be like to go back in time. What it'd feel like to be inside that corridor once it charged up. Turned out he'd been well prepared. Didn't feel so different from a stutter. Over the years, he'd racked about 200 hours in simulated zero states, but this week he found that there was something about the real thing be a whole lot more. Everything got real quiet. He can go anywhere, do anything. It was a powerful feeling. Being the only person in town with agency and will, maybe the only person in the entire world. Inside the time machine, he kept his assault carbine tucked tight into his shoulder as he moved steadily around the loop. Nothing and nobody in here except him. Wherever his team was, that wasn't where he was going. They were going to find that Joyce kid, and they were going to kill him, just like Mr. Hatch ordered. But the thing Gibson wanted more than anything else was to find Beth Wilder and hurt her till she died. He hoped Voss or IR hadn't beaten him to it. His face hurt. His face never stopped hurting. The Monarch medic said to keep his eye, but it wasn't what it was. And his pockets were enough high-grade painkillers to keep him going for weeks. He needed Wilder dead. The bug in his brain wouldn't stop wriggling unless he knew she died screaming. But he had a family to think about. So he sent himself through last. Made sure he came out later than his crew. 2009. If one of his squaddies managed to smoke her, he'd just have lived with that. The exit door came into view around the corner. Gibson slapped the release plate and stood back as the hatch opened. Then he crossed the threshold from zero state to causality, moving into the airlock, scanning left to right, up and down. Clear. He slung the carbine, snatched a quick look at the grimy viewplate. Looked like the machine was set up inside of a concrete room. Basement, maybe. Some kind of signage was sprayed on the opposite wall. Standing lights provided stark illumination. Gibson worked out how to release the hatch and crank it open. The stench hit him like a physical blow, stale and rich and sweet. His wife's huevos rancheros belted up and out of him in a single wave. He recognized that smell. It was the stench of pits, execution chambers, and abattoirs. With one arm pressed tight against his nose and mouth, Gibson moved down the ramp, carbine slung, sidearm in hand. The standing lamps were bright in his face, so bright that he almost tripped over Voss's body. Gone, black and leathery, curled up on the ramp, recognizable only from insignia and name tag. Gibson's visions adjusted to the rest of the cramped room came into focus. The room had been built up around the machine, built to enclose it. There was barely enough room for the machine, the ramp, and the lights. There was a body on the ramp. From the haircut, he knew it was Chaffee. Half his head was missing, his sidearm still clutched in one bony black hand. What was left of Dominguez sat on its knees, lonely behind a standing lamp, head pushed into a corner. MRE and candy bar wrappers lay scattered here and there. "Leave the laws of the universe to me," Hatch had said. Bullshit. His plan was rolling, and C1 knew all about it. They'd been sent here because they knew now the wrong side of Hatch's cost-benefit analysis. Gibson gave the tiniest laugh, because this wasn't real. But just the one. There was another body, this one at the foot of the ramp. Propped against the wall, at the base of the ramp, was what had to be IR. Half skeletonized and collapsed into her blood-stained uniform, carbine resting across her lap. They were all dead. He was the last of Chronon 1. Gibson wheeled around, frantically scanning the machine. The controls had been removed. He spun back, looking for any advantage, anything he could use Any... Behind him, the airlock hissed. Gibson threw himself at the door, and it smooched shut. He bellowed, red with fury and frustration, knowing beyond a doubt he and his crew had been set up. Wilder had gotten here early and sealed the machine inside a fucking sarcophagus. They'd all landed here, greeted by IR's corpse, and slowly starved to death. How long had they sat here, making their rations last, with corpses for company and knowing they was looking at their own future? This would not be his fate. He would not die here. Not like this. The words spray-painted on the wall at the base of the ramp said otherwise. You lose, pumpkin butter. Gibson read them, and roared till he tasted blood. When that was done, the security camera adjusted focus, giving itself away with a tiny whir. Gibson looked up into the lens that looked at him, knowing who was on the other end. You know I'm getting out of here, don't you? You know, and when there was a loud snap and a descending whine as power to the machine cut off. Gibson noticed, wouldn't be intimidated. And when I do... Power to the left bank of lights cut abruptly, throwing the coffin room into bleak twilight. I'm coming for you, you little bitch! For Donnie! And for Irene! He knew it was coming, and he met it. But the remaining lights didn't switch off. He glanced back at them and then back at the camera. The camera whirred, shaking its head left to right. No. Half mad with rage and terror, he screamed, pulled at all he had into it, and thought Volley might save him, or kill her. Light vanished, and blackness devoured Randall Gibson. Sunday, 4th of July 2010, midnight, 01, Riverport Swimming Hall, 1 year later. Jack stepped out of the time machine onto the ramp, armed and scanning. He recognized the swimming hall. Pretty much everything was the way he remembered it from 2016, but with one difference. Someone had built a concrete enclosure around the machine, and then tore it down. The jagged track across the empty pool's width remained. The air smelled different, too, like fresh laundry and cooking, hot, frying smells, bacon. Someone was living here. The workbenches in front of the machine were still there, one now cleared of Will's clutter. Laid across it was a neatly arranged kit, Kevlar vest, assault carbine, handgun, 3 magazines for each, all Monarch issue. Someone appeared in the doorway at the far end of the pool, equipped with the same kit, and rested in front of Jack, her red hair tied in a ponytail. She stepped into the light. It was her, Beth, but changed. The years had left their imprint. The line of her jaw a little softer, care around her eyes etched more deeply than she deserved. She looked tired, but it was still Beth, still strong, still unbowed. Hey, Trouble, she said, quavering. Want breakfast? I got an early start. Jack dropped his gun and ran to her. Half an hour later. He had 100 questions, and she did her best to answer what she could. She walked Jack through her 11 years here, living from 1999 to 2010, the present day, the almost perpetual déjà vu, distracting herself from everything she knew by obsessively searching for the things she didn't in an effort to remain engaged with the world, to not think of it as a video game she had played before, to think of lives and events as happening to real people and not simulations of history. She told him about Gibson and his crew, and how they all ended. She told him how she had lived for years in a hideout in the woods, keeping an eye on Jack's younger self, and Will, ensuring no threat from the present or future interfered with Will's work. If enemy action resulted in the countermeasure being somehow flawed, it was all over. Hey, she said, remember what's going down this morning? Jack nodded. Aberfoyle, Bannerman's Overlook. The younger self's all grown up. She's Zed now. Got in touch a few weeks ago. Asked for some help. I obliged. Jack looked at her. To him, 40 minutes ago, in another world, everything had been as it was. Now, 40 minutes later, the woman he'd loved had spent 11 years without him. had grown 11 years older than he. Was a different person than the one he had known. That at least he was used to. His hands closed tight on hers, and he kissed her. She was still Beth. She rested her forehead against his. "Let's take a drive," he said. Sunday, 4th of July 2010, 4:52 a.m., Riverport, Massachusetts. Bright morning light pushed through the pines and birches that blanketed the hillside sloping gently toward Riverport. Jack and Beth stood on a slanting boulder, squinting toward a channel in the woods that framed the excellent view of the Bannerman's overlook 2 miles away. "Funny thing," Beth said. "I'm history's only Scorpio with a birthday in March." Jack took a pair of binoculars from their backpack. "Say what?" "I was born October 30th. I went through the machine October 9th, 21 days before my birthday. I came out February 28th, 1999, a leap year. February 28 plus 21 days is March 20th, so now the day I age a year is March 20th. Jack slung the binocular strap around his neck. "And I thought what I disliked about time travel was the jet lag." Beth checked her watch, clicked her pen, made a note in her moleskin pad. Jack focused the binoculars, bringing the Bannerman's overlook platform into sharp focus. Their 22-year-old selves and Aberfoyle came into focus. Jack and Paul looking over the rail toward Riverport. Aberfoyle and Zed talking 30 feet behind them. Jack panned. 3 goons waiting with the car. Panned back to himself and Paul. "You okay?" Beth asked. "Sure." "Really? 'Cause for a second you sound like a dog having a nightmare." He couldn't look away. "I didn't know how this would make me feel, being back here." "So, how do you feel?" "Mortal." He lowered the binoculars. "Did you talk to her then?" "Zed? Sure, I practically raised her. Well, I left her in the care of friends. I checked in a few times a year." Jack shook his head. "You abducted yourself, gave yourself to strangers. Couldn't you have trained her while she was still living with her folks? Your folks, I mean?" "No, Jack, 'cause that's not what happened. I also don't have the resources or facilities to raise a child here. And how exactly do you imagine I'd go about negotiating with her parents? I lived with this whole deal, every detail, my entire life. You just got here. Believe me, I'm across it." Jack was still 28. Yesterday she had been 2. Now a day later to him she was 39. Jack reached out and took her hand. Wanted to say something, but didn't know where to begin. "Gonna need you to keep an eye on the overlook," she said, taking her hand from his. "Need exact times for the detonations." He let it go, glanced back through the trees. The younger cells were still in the same places. Nothing had escalated yet. "But you set the explosives a week ago, right?" "After Zed got in touch, yeah." "So that trick you pulled, Zed pulls, pointing at having his thing explode. How did the two expect to get the timing right exactly? That's a hell of a needle to be threading." "It's impossible for the timing to be anything but exactly right." Beth held up her notepad. "The timers on the explosive have been set to detonate the exact moments required." "Yeah, but that's some really fine choreography. I don't see how you're getting into..." "It breaks down like this. You ready?" "Sure." "Think of Zed as my younger self, and me as my older self. My younger self gives my older self the detonation times." "Yeah, but how did she get..." Beth cut him off with a wave finger. "Hear me out. My younger self gives my older self the detonation times. My older self sets the bombs to those times. The bombs detonate. As they detonate, my older self notes the exact timing of the explosive and writes them down in a new book." Beth held that new book up. "My older self then gives my younger self this new book. My younger self transcribes those times into her own new book, the one that's a precise copy of the old book her old self gave her when she was 11, so that when she can give it to her younger self in 1999, when she becomes her older self. Then, that 11-year-old younger self grows and becomes the same older self, and here we are." Jack wasn't blinking. "So," she continued, "to boil it down, the buildings exploded at exactly the right moment because I'm sitting here noting the exact time when Zed gestures, and then, when she becomes me, that information is used to set the timers on the charges." Jack wasn't saying anything. "I know, I had the same problems. Will was very patient with me on that front, actually." "If I'm understanding this, That doesn't make sense. I mean, there has to be a point where somewhere in there when that happens for the first time, right? When you don't have any of that information, when you can't set the bombs for the right times. Yes and no. Yes, and this is the first time, right now. And no, there's never a moment when I don't have the information. How much do you know about this stuff? I skimmed a Terminator argument on Reddit once. No. The bottom line is, it works. The paradox is accounted for, or factored out, because the behavior of fundamentally particles in the quantum scale under certain conditions aren't strictly deterministic. They follow fuzzy rules. What? General relativity works just fine for predicting paradoxes, but once those paradoxes are considered in, or subjected to, quantum mechanics terms, they pretty much vanish provided causality is maintained. Says Will. The dude built a time machine. I'll take his opinion over Reddit's. Also, she waved the book again, I have the times. Jesus. You should have been there when I explained this to Will. He was really upset. He said this observation could be critical in formulating a theory that unifies general relativity with quantum mechanics, but ironically, he couldn't have time to look into it. He was too busy building the countermeasure and trying to save the future. I thought science wasn't your thing. He took each of her hands into his. She was still Beth. Still Zed. Still the person he fell for. Jack, how much do you remember about being 16? Weird question. Not a lot. It was 12 years ago. Jack, she said, you remember being 16 the way I remember you. I haven't seen you in that long. Beth steeled herself and said, and gently as she could, if it wasn't for me watching you grow up, I probably wouldn't remember what you looked like. It's been 11 years of living off-grid, staying out of the way, out of the future, and trying to keep both you and Will alive. I don't need love. I don't need romance. I don't need drama. I just want to go home. Jack let go of her hands, stepped away, and turned back toward the overlook. Paul was standing alone. Zed had led Aberfoyle away from Jack. Aberfoyle raised his gun, level with Zed's head. I know you have feelings for that girl over there, but she's gone. Love the memory, okay? He really did. Beth's phone chirped. On screen was a message. It was from William Joyce. It read, completed. Jack said, it's happening. At Bannerman's Overlook, Zed pointed to the horizon. The first building went up in flames.